Morning light sliced sharply through the airport lounge, glinting on polished first-class seats that seemed untouched by the world. Marcus Ellison walked with quiet authority, each step measured, exuding a calm that contrasted sharply with the subtle tension in the room. Passengers glanced up briefly, then quickly looked away as if sensing something unspoken yet profound in his presence. Around him, whispers floated through the air, and the polished veneer of etiquette hid invisible hierarchies, entitlement carefully preserved by unspoken rules. The flight manager's eyes lingered too long, a polite mask barely concealing something heavier, a subtle dismissal that carried decades of unacknowledged bias. "Good morning, sir. First class is currently full," he said, glancing at the manifest. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Full?" His voice was calm, almost a whisper, yet it carried a weight that made the manager hesitate. Empty seats gleamed in the sunlight behind him, a quiet contradiction to the excuses that hovered in the air. "It seems protocol doesn't always match reality," Marcus said, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire. Nearby, a junior attendant shifted nervously. "Sir, sometimes there are—" Marcus interrupted gently. "Excuses are easy. Courage is rare. Which will we choose today?" The manager's jaw tightened. His polite mask faltered. Hands stiffened, murmurs spread through the lounge, and eyes began to avert. Marcus's mind reflected briefly on years of small indignities, glances that said he did not belong. Yet here, in quiet composure, he felt a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, as if the balance of power had already begun to bend. He stepped aside, letting the manager fumble through the manifest while passengers watched in hushed anticipation. Somewhere in that silence, dignity had already started to reclaim its space. The flight manager's eyes lingered on Marcus longer than necessary, a quiet arrogance radiating from his polished uniform. "Sir, first class isn't available," he said, voice clipped, precise, yet carrying a weight that seemed to settle over the cabin like dust. Marcus tilted his head, letting the words hang. "Then I'll wait. Or perhaps we can fix this oversight," he murmured, calm but deliberate, each syllable measured. A brief pause followed, and the manager's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the junior attendant who fidgeted, hands clasped nervously in front of her. Sometimes we, she stammered. Marcus's eyes softened on her, but his voice was quiet, firm. "It's all right. Speak the truth, even if it's uncomfortable." The manager's hand brushed a folder across the counter, restless fingers betraying the tension he refused to admit. "Protocols," he began, but stopped, swallowed, and gestured toward the empty seats beyond the partition, sun glinting off the leather. Marcus's gaze followed, unwavering. "Protocol should never outweigh respect," he said. Silence fell again, heavier this time, punctuated only by the faint shuffle of a passenger adjusting in their seat. He noticed the whispers spreading, discreet recordings from phones, the subtle sideways glances of other staff, the small, imperceptible cracks in the manager's facade. Marcus reflected briefly, inwardly. A lifetime of being overlooked had taught him patience. Quiet observation was sharper than outrage. Finally, the manager exhaled, voice low, defeated. "We'll see what can be done, sir." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." No applause followed. No dramatic confrontation, just the hush of a room shifting imperceptibly, the invisible scales tilting. The silence itself became the loudest statement, signaling a subtle reclaiming of space, a quiet assertion of dignity that needed no audience to validate it. Marcus let his gaze drift, not toward the empty seats or the murmuring passengers, but inward to memories that had never fully faded. A corporate gala years ago, colleagues laughing just a little too loudly as he passed, as if his presence were an intrusion. Boardroom meetings where his proposals were nodded at politely, only to be later credited to someone else. Small, quiet moments, the shrug, the glance, the subtle word left unspoken that had stacked into a lifetime of dismissal. A voice from the present broke his reverie. "Sir, we'll try to accommodate you if—" The junior attendant's voice wavered, unsure. Marcus's lips curved into a small, controlled nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your honesty." He noticed the flight manager pacing slightly, muttering under his breath, fingers tapping the counter. "This isn't usual." Marcus's tone remained calm, almost gentle. "Nothing about respect should be usual," he said, letting the words settle. A whisper came from a nearby passenger. "Did he just say that?" The manager stiffened, realizing the subtle shift around him. Phones discreetly lifted, recording, documenting the imbalance of power he had assumed as permanent. Marcus reflected inwardly. "For decades, I waited. For decades, I endured the polite dismissals, the microaggressions. Patience was my shield. Composure my weapon. Today, silence will speak louder than any confrontation." The flight manager exhaled sharply, the polite mask cracking further. "We'll see what can be done," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Marcus inclined his head, letting the acknowledgement linger without triumph. Around him, the room shifted subtly, eyes tracking him, whispers forming, a quiet recognition that power, when wielded with restraint, can dismantle arrogance without raising a voice. In that moment, history's weight settled. But Marcus's dignity remained unbroken, a quiet force reclaiming the space he had always deserved. Marcus's gaze swept the lounge, sharp and calculating, taking in every slight movement, every nervous shuffle. A passenger adjusted their bag, glancing toward him before quickly looking away. A flight attendant shifted weight from one foot to the other, avoiding eye contact. Even the flight manager's posture stiffened, hands curling briefly over the counter, an almost imperceptible tremor betraying unease. "Sir," the manager said, voice tight, we'll check the manifest again." Marcus inclined his head, calm. "Please do. Accuracy matters." The manager hesitated, then muttered under his breath. "It's never this complicated," a junior attendant whispered to a colleague. I didn't think this would happen." Marcus's internal reflection was quiet but potent. Every glance, every pause, every hesitation tells a story. Years of small indignities, overlooked and ignored, have taught patience. Calm observation is sharper than any outburst. The flight manager cleared his throat, forcing composure. "Sir, perhaps a seat could be made available." Marcus let the words hang in the air. "We'll see," he said softly. The murmurs around him grew, barely audible yet unavoidable. Phones were lifted discreetly, subtle recordings capturing the shift in tension. He noticed the ripple, the small ways authority bowed to quiet insistence, how arrogance faltered under still, unwavering observation. The flight manager exhaled, the polite mask cracking further. We'll manage it." Marcus's lips curved in a near-invisible nod, not in triumph, but acknowledgement. Around him, the room felt different, slightly off balance, tense yet controlled, a subtle recognition that power was no longer unilateral. Some moments are quiet, almost imperceptible, yet carry the weight of revelation. Marcus's gaze lingered unbroken, and in that stillness, the first threads of change began to weave themselves, unnoticed by most, yet impossible to ignore. Marcus stepped aside as the manager disappeared through the narrow doorway, his presence lingering in the subtle shift of the room. A flight attendant glanced at another, eyes wide, then quickly dropped her gaze. "Did you hear what he said?" she whispered. Yeah," the other replied, voice low. "I didn't think anyone would ever call it out." Marcus's ears caught more than the words. Fingers tapping nervously on clipboards, half smiles forced into polite masks, the way corners of the hallway seemed to shrink under the weight of scrutiny. He reflected briefly. Years of favoritism, whispers, and ignored complaints have built these invisible walls. Today, quiet observation will test them. The flight manager returned, muttering under his breath, "This shouldn't be happening." Marcus's voice was calm, measured. "Perhaps it should. Perhaps it's overdue." The manager's hands tightened on the railing. "Sir, procedures," Marcus interrupted gently, almost a whisper. "Procedures are only as strong as the people who enforce them." A junior staffer, hesitant, leaned toward a colleague. He's not angry. Not like others would be. It's weirdly powerful." Marcus noticed the subtle cracks forming, the polite mask of authority faltering, eyes shifting to avoid confrontation, murmurs growing louder. Silence, carefully maintained, weighed heavier than any raised voice. The manager exhaled sharply, muttering, "We'll review it." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Do what is right, not what is convenient." A hush settled over the hallway, not of fear, but of recognition. Small gestures, a nod, a swallowed response, averted eyes, signaled the invisible walls beginning to crumble. The whispers, once protective of bias, now trembled under the weight of scrutiny. Every quiet exchange, every silent acknowledgement, became a thread in the subtle unraveling Marcus had orchestrated without raising his voice. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly as he remembered a gala from a decade ago. A colleague leaned close to whisper a compliment, only to redirect the praise to someone else seconds later. The memory made his jaw tighten, but he breathed slowly, centering himself. Years of these small betrayals taught patience. Every ignored accolade built the foundation for this moment. A soft cough brought him back. The flight manager cleared his throat. "Sir, perhaps if we adjust the seating arrangements." Marcus's voice was calm, measured. "Adjustments should reflect fairness, not convenience." The manager flinched, hands fidgeting with a clipboard. We normally... This isn't typical." Marcus inclined his head slightly, letting the silence speak. "Perhaps typical is what allowed decades of quiet injustice to go unnoticed," a junior attendant whispered, barely audible. He's not angry. Not at all. It's disarming." Marcus's gaze swept the room, taking in the subtle shifts, the way eyes darted, voices lowered, the manager's mask of authority beginning to crack. He reflected inwardly. Decades of polite dismissals, of being overlooked at every gathering, taught me that quiet persistence can be louder than anger. Observation sharpens strategy. Composure commands attention. The flight manager exhaled, voice low. We'll make a review." Marcus's nod was slight, almost imperceptible. "Good. Let's do what is right, not what is convenient." The whispers in the lounge grew, barely audible yet undeniable. Phones subtly recorded, eyes followed, and the subtle power dynamics began to shift. What once had been ignored, the microaggressions, the dismissals, the subtle exclusion, was now illuminated, amplified by restraint. In that calm, measured stillness, Marcus transformed past indignities into quiet authority. The room understood, without words, that the balance of power was tilting, and the echoes of old slights now resonated as unspoken warnings. Marcus's fingers hovered briefly over his phone before sending a concise email. A call followed, soft-spoken, measured, but heavy with authority. "Please confirm the arrangements," he said, voice calm. "Accuracy matters. No exceptions." On the other end, the airline executive hesitated. "Yes, sir. We'll handle it." Marcus ended the call and looked up. A passenger nearby raised an eyebrow, subtly lifting a phone. Another whispered, Is he actually doing this quietly?" The flight manager's face tightened. "Sir, perhaps..." Marcus shook his head gently. "No interruptions. Just the facts." A junior attendant leaned toward a colleague. He's not shouting. He's calm, and everyone's noticing. It's unsettling," the other nodded. "I've never seen him like this." And the manager, "He's cracking." Marcus moved toward the gate, each step deliberate. "Do what is right, not what is convenient," he said softly, as though to no one. Yet everyone heard. A subtle murmur rippled through the lounge, passengers glancing up, phones discreetly recording the shift in tension. The flight staff exchanged uneasy glances, hands fidgeting, eyes avoiding his. The invisible hierarchy, once solid, began to bend under quiet but unwavering scrutiny. The flight manager muttered, "Sir, we'll review everything." Marcus's nod was imperceptible but loaded. Good. Let transparency lead. Each whisper, each subtle gesture was a thread unraveling the complacency that had long protected bias. Silence carried authority. Restraint became the loudest command in the room. Narration lingered briefly. Power is often assumed, but the quiet insistence of truth and dignity can bend the strongest walls. Marcus didn't need anger. Control had a new language, and the room was learning it fast. The manager's shoulders slumped ever so slightly. Around him, the lounge shifted, tension coiling like spring-loaded dominoes ready to fall. A flight attendant's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the beverage cart. Sir, we usually... Marcus's eyes met hers, calm but unwavering. You can or you will. She swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. We follow protocol. Marcus inclined his head, letting the pause speak. Protocol serves fairness, not convenience. Remember that. Nearby, an internal affairs officer cleared his throat, glancing at a notebook he hadn't opened in years. I've seen this before. Never like this, he muttered to a colleague. The colleague raised an eyebrow. He's quiet. That's what's unsettling. You can feel the weight shift. The flight manager's fingers tapped nervously on the counter. Sir, perhaps if we review the logs, reconsider the seating. Marcus's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. Reviewing doesn't change reality. Transparency does. Actions speak louder than excuses. A hush fell over the lounge. Phones subtly recorded. Passengers craning to see, some whispering among themselves. Is he really doing this without shouting? One murmured. The internal affairs officer scribbled rapidly, thoughts racing. Everything we ignored, all the small injustices quietly accumulating. Today it begins to surface. The flight manager exhaled sharply, shoulders sagging imperceptibly. We will make the adjustments immediately. Marcus's gaze swept the room, noting the shift. Hands fidgeting, glances avoiding contact, whispered exchanges. Good. Let's ensure accountability, not comfort. Narration lingered. Power is often assumed, but the quiet insistence of fairness and dignity exposes cracks in even the most entrenched systems. Observers may not yet understand the full scale, but the balance has begun to tilt. The reckoning is imminent. The subtle tremor in the room, once imperceptible, grew undeniable. Every glance, every murmur, every hesitation hinted at the coming unraveling, the moment when silence would no longer protect injustice. A junior flight attendant's voice wavered. Sir, I don't think we... Marcus held up a hand, calm yet unyielding. You don't think or you refuse? She swallowed hard, eyes darting to colleagues. We follow orders. Marcus leaned slightly forward, gaze steady. Orders are not immunity. Respect isn't optional. It's earned. An executive cleared his throat, nervously shuffling papers. Mr. Ellison, perhaps we can reconsider how this is handled? Marcus's lips curved just enough to indicate awareness. Reconsideration won't restore what's been ignored for years. Accountability will, whispers threaded through the lounge. Phones discreetly lifted, passengers recording. Did he just say what I think he said? Murmured one traveler. The flight manager's mask of control trembled. Fingers tapped against a counter, voice barely audible. Protocol... Marcus's gaze sharpened. Protocol does not excuse exclusion. Decisions don't get made in silence or behind closed doors anymore. A hush fell. A junior attendant muttered, I didn't think anyone would speak up. Narration lingered, drawing attention to subtle shifts. Every glance, every hesitant movement revealed the cracks in an assumed hierarchy. The arrogance once taken for granted now trembled under quiet authority. The invisible walls of entitlement so carefully constructed were beginning to crumble. The flight manager's shoulders sagged. The executives exchanged glances, powerless and exposed. Marcus straightened, his calm radiating strength. Privilege is not a right. Respect is earned. A low murmur ran through the room, uneasy, recognizing, irreversible. Eyes that once avoided scrutiny now met him, the weight of silent observation pressing down. The collapse was not violent, but inevitable. A junior flight attendant's hands trembled as she whispered, Sir, people are... Recording. Marcus glanced toward the crowd, calm, unflinching. Let them. A passenger leaned forward, phone discreetly raised. Is he handling this himself? Marcus's eyes met hers briefly. I've always handled what others ignored. From the side, the flight manager muttered, voice low and brittle. We didn't anticipate... Marcus cut through the hesitation, gentle but unyielding. Anticipation doesn't excuse neglect. Compliance does not replace conscience. A senior executive's lips tightened. Mr. Ellison, perhaps we should... Marcus shook his head slightly. No. Today is clarity, not compromise. Whispers multiplied. He's filing complaints? Public exposure? The junior attendant swallowed. We've never seen someone act without noise? Marcus supplied, voice steady. Silence is louder than shouting when used correctly. The flight manager's face flushed. He stammered, "This, you can't." Marcus leaned just enough not to intimidate, but to assert. Watch closely. Accountability does not need theatrics. It needs precision and observation. Narration highlighted subtle shifts. Each gesture, each hesitant glance revealed the disintegration of arrogance once assumed permanent. Staff posture softened. Nervous murmurs replaced indifference. Passengers, silent witnesses, absorbed the authority that moved quietly yet inexorably. The weight of unseen leverage, applied with restraint, reshaped the room. A colleague muttered, almost to herself, "He's different." Marcus straightened, voice calm, almost a whisper. Justice isn't loud, it's meticulous, visible only to those willing to notice. The flight manager's composure finally cracked, shoulders slumping. Murmurs swelled. Phones captured, eyes recorded, dignity endured. Marcus walked past, leaving the consequences of arrogance exposed, yet unshaken. A reporter's phone buzzed. Mr. Ellison. The coverage, it's everywhere. Marcus sipped his coffee slowly. Let it speak for itself. The assistant glanced nervously. Some executives, they've resigned already. Minor reforms announced. Marcus's gaze remained calm. Resignations are noise. Change is measured in how people behave when no one is looking. A passenger from the flight approached quietly. I saw it all. The calm, the everything you did. Marcus nodded once. That's all I wanted. Observation, not applause. Another colleague hesitated. People are talking, sharing clips. It's viral. Good, Marcus replied softly. Let them see what restraint looks like. Let arrogance learn humility without a shout. The assistant's eyes narrowed. Nearby, a junior flight attendant whispered to a peer. I never thought we'd be held accountable, so... Silently. The peer shook her head. It's different. Uncomfortable, but right. Narration gently threaded through. The room shifted in subtle ways. Peers whispered. Public attention rose without frenzy. The system, once unyielding, now bent slightly under the weight of dignity, exercised quietly but insistently. Marcus did not need recognition. His authority moved through restraint, turning everyday actions into profound statements of justice. A taxi driver passing by the airport screen muttered, Look at him, standing calm while they scramble. Marcus smiled faintly at his daughter's text. You inspire more than you know. He typed a reply. Courage doesn't need applause, just persistence. Nearby, airline staff avoided eye contact, their arrogance replaced with hesitation. Phones captured, eyes noticed, and the world quietly acknowledged that justice could exist without noise, measured not by applause, but by the calm reshaping of power. Marcus sank into the worn leather chair, the city lights spilling through the window. His phone buzzed again. Dad? His daughter's text read, You handled it perfectly. Proud of you, he typed back slowly. Pride isn't needed. Change is. A soft knock at the door startled him. His assistant peeked in. The emails. They keep coming. People thanking you, supporting you. Marcus shook his head. I never sought recognition. Just accountability. The assistant hesitated. Do you feel satisfied? He leaned back, gazing at the empty first-class cabin, replaying in his mind. Satisfaction is watching arrogance remain empty, untouched. That's enough. The assistant smiled, quiet but tentative. You've shifted something. More than they realize. Marcus's eyes softened, reflective. Yes, and quietly, that's the point. The ripples are subtle but persistent. A neighbor's voice called from the hallway. Marcus, you're calm even after all that? He answered without looking up. Calm is louder than anger. Quiet authority lasts longer than fury. Narration swept in. he walked through streets unnoticed, yet fully seen in his own resolve. Each step carried the weight of small victories, emails, messages, empty seats, the subtle bending of privilege. The world around him hadn't applauded, but silently behavior shifted. Courage need not roar. It moves quietly, reshaping expectation and respect alike. His daughter's laughter echoed in a voice note. "You inspire more than you know, Dad." He smiled faintly. Perhaps it is the world learning to watch, to notice, to adjust without force. That is change. Outside, streetlights glimmered. Passers-by carried on unaware, but the invisible architecture of dignity had been strengthened, reinforced by restraint, persistence, and a quiet assertion of truth.